In today's video, I'm going to give you 10 reasons why you might be painting or indeed creating any type of artwork just too fast. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle, and on this channel I teach all things watercolor as well as lots of drawing tutorials, mixed media, even some business and motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. It's completely free, and if you click the little bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube. Now, I did a survey recently on my Facebook group and also here on YouTube in the community section, I think, and I asked you what your biggest pain point or your biggest difficulty was in creating artwork. Lots of you said drawing skills, but a very, very close second was lack of time. It's a real problem for all of us, isn't it? It doesn't seem to matter what our stage of life is, whether we're young and working or older and staying at home with kids, or even retired. I know so many of my friends who've retired and they just get busier and busier. It's so hard to find enough time to create artwork. So why on earth am I telling you to slow down? Why on earth am I telling you that you're painting too quickly? And that's because I see so many beginners doing this and so many beginners really ruining their work. We're just slowing down and taking a few sort of more careful strategies and working processes could save them a whole lot of artwork. Now, earlier this year, I bought I say earlier this year, it's almost the end of the year. Earlier this year, I bought a sewing machine. I bought myself an overlocker. Now, if you sew, you'll know that an overlocker is something that makes stretchy garments. It oversews all the edges. It cuts off the excess. It speeds you up so much. And I actually made this very plain looking sweatshirt on it. Thinking about next year, I'm thinking to myself, do I want to create, endless cheap t-shirts? Or do I want to really slow down and maybe take a whole month over creating a really nice linen jacket that I might wear for years to come? Now, it's exactly the same with your artwork. So I'm going to go through 10 sort of strategies and ideas today. It's just a talking video, so if you prefer to listen to this video just like a podcast, I'm very into podcasts at the moment. Never got any time for watching TV. You can listen to this video if you prefer. I'm going to go through 10 reasons why I think you may be painting too fast and some strategies for slowing down, being more intentional, and above all, getting much, much better results. So you aren't constantly frustrated and churning out painting after painting or drawing after drawing that you aren't happy with. Now, I'm going to be talking about this subject from the point of view of watercolor painting, but if you paint oils or acrylics, if you draw or make pastel paintings, it makes no difference. All of these strategies are equally important. They just are perhaps a little bit more important with watercolor because it's a bit less forgiving than other mediums. So let's jump into the first one and discover how slowing down can actually lead to much better and more successful results. So the first place that I see people not taking enough time is actually just choosing their source image. Now, you may be painting from life, or you may be photographing from life, or you may be using one of the copyright-free photograph resources on the internet, but whatever you're doing, I see people sort of either just grabbing something they think is good enough or just not taking enough time to source the thing that they need. Now, I once was commissioned to do a painting. It's actually of the village where I live now. I wasn't living there at the time, but my friend commissioned me to do a painting of the high street of the village. It's a very pretty village. And I drove over here 3 times in different weather conditions and sort of stood in the middle of the road, nearly getting run over to ensure that I had a good photograph. I wanted the sun out because I wanted shadows. I wanted the best possible chance of doing that commission. Now, I'm not calling anybody out here, but you know who you are, who take commissions from your friend to paint their dog that died 3 years ago, and all they've got is this tiny blurry photograph. It's about that big and it's black and white, and you say to them, of course I'll have a go at painting your dog. Just stop that. I can't tell you how many times I see people taking commissions on, and they're usually semi-professional or amateur artists, because a professional artist would just at that point say, no, I'm not painting your dead dog. I know you loved him. I'd really love to do this for you, but the source image is not good enough. You're scuppering your chances of success if you don't have a really good source image or just one that you like. I mean, I've seen people as well, especially when I was teaching classes, we had lots of photographs and like, well, I don't really like this one, but I'll give it a go. Stop right there. You have to like the thing that you're painting, and you have to be confident that you can see everything on that photograph. So make sure that your source image is exactly what you want. This also goes for if you're painting from real life. If there's a certain view that you want to do, the weather conditions aren't right, or you just yourself are not in a good place, got a headache or whatever, just stop right there, because this is the very first point of your artwork creation. If you don't have that correct source image, you aren't going to get a good result. Now, my second point is very heavily related to my first point, and that's starting with a bad underdrawing or rushing the drawing. Now, I can't tell you how much you need to draw because that all depends on your painting style and also the subject and the medium that you're using. But all I want to say is that you must be happy with your underdrawing. You must give yourself the best chance of success. And when it comes to watercolor painting, this is particularly important because it's so much less adjustable. If you have a really bad underdrawing and you're doing acrylics, well, you are going to sort of pretty much cover up all of that drawing at some point. And you could, just go in with a thin paintbrush and really sketch the thing again. You don't have that option with watercolor. Now, watercolor's a lot more adjustable than people think it is, but if the whole underdrawing is wrong, you really are on a highway to nowhere. I see this so much in Facebook groups that I'm in, online art groups, people going in and asking for advice. How can I fix this painting? And the truth is, particularly with watercolors, you can't fix it because the underdrawing is wrong and you started from a place that gave you no chance of success. So if you aren't happy with your drawing, don't start your painting. I know I say it in pretty much every video, but a bad drawing is never going to lead to a good painting. Putting color on is just going to accent your mistakes. Now, the next time that some of you are rushing, and this heavily relates to the first two things I've spoken about too. Goodness, we haven't even really started our painting yet, and this is not setting out your workspace, not getting everything ready before you start. It may even be something like you think you've got a tube of ultramarine paint, but really you've run out and you need to order that. So before you even start painting, you should set out your workspace. I do have a video coming up next year all about some workspace hacks for you, some ways that I set out my space so that everything's ready and successful for me. Meantime, just check at least that you have everything you need. This comes down to things like paper stretching. If this is something that you do, you need to make sure that that's ready as well. I'm as guilty of this as the next person. The amount of times I've decided that I'm going to paint a certain thing and then I find I haven't even got any paper stretched onto board, or the ink that I was going to use has dried up. Take time to make sure you've got everything ready and everything set out. Often with watercolor painting, you need to work very quickly and you don't want to be sort of scrapping around trying to find what's happened to your 2-inch flat brush, especially if you've got kids around because they will wander off with that stuff. Make sure you've got everything ready. And if you haven't got everything you need, if you do need to wait an extra day because you've got to stretch some paper, or if you do need to order a tube of ultramarine, stop right there and just do those things. Nothing is so important that you have to start that piece of work today. It's very stressful to put yourself under this kind of pressure all the time. And then as you go through the artwork, the pressure just ramps up and ramps up because you haven't got everything that you needed. And the whole experience becomes a lot more frustrating and a lot less successful. So make sure that you have everything set out and that you have everything you need prepared and ordered, sharpened, whatever, before you start. Now, the next way that some of you are working too quickly is you're going straight in with techniques that you haven't really tried out. So if you're thinking of using salt or an embossing tool or masking fluid or anything at all, have you tried it out before you start? I always work with little scraps of paper next to me so that I can try out techniques before I apply them. And be very careful with this because this may be a technique that you've done successfully before and you feel quite confident in it. But let me tell you, there are so many things that are going to affect how successful that technique is, especially if working in watercolors, but also quick drying mediums like acrylics, the heat and the humidity that you're working within. And here in the UK, we have a huge, it's literally snow on the ground at the moment, but in a couple of days' time, it could be much warmer and drier. Heat and humidity and light levels will affect your work, and then it will be affected by the pigments that you're using, particularly with watercolors when so many different colors react in so many different ways. You've got transparent pigments, you've got semi-opaque pigments. I've got a video coming up all about how to read a paint tube soon. But you've got granulation, and then you've got to take into account your paper surface. Perhaps you're working on a different surface to normal. What I'm saying is that just because you've used a technique before doesn't mean that necessarily it's going to be exactly what you need this time. And some techniques, particularly things like salt and cling film and some of these more exciting techniques with watercolors, they don't always give consistent results. And salt is a terrible one for this. So just because you used it once before and you've got some beautiful little crystal marks, you may find when you use it this time, all you get are a few small dots appear on the paper. So I want you to take time to try out your techniques, even if you've used them before. Give yourself that opportunity to backtrack. Try out a technique on a scrap of paper. Give yourself the chance to look at it and say, oh, I thought that was going to really work, but now I look at it, now it's dried, and now I hold it against my paper. I don't think that's going to work here at all. and you've just saved yourself a lot of heartache. As always, can I just remind you at this point, if you haven't pressed that like button, that thumbs up, could you just do that for me, please? At the time of making this video, I'm about 200 subscribers away from getting to 100k. Never imagined that we would get this far. If you can like, comment, share, or subscribe, I can keep teaching painting here on YouTube and helping more people on their painting and drawing journey. So my next point is very heavily related to the last point, and that's colour mixing. Are you trying out your colours before you put them on the paper? I always do this. Again, those little swatches of paper that I have, I always swatch a colour. Now with every medium, your colour will change slightly as it dries. With acrylics, it tends to get darker. With watercolours, it can get up to 50% lighter. And with gouache, it can go lighter or it can go darker. Normally goes a little darker. But I want you to try your colours out on a swatch of paper before you put them on your painting. Are you prepared with your colours? Have you got sort of a limited palette to work within? I've done other videos on this channel about choosing limited palettes. I do have more of those coming up next year, so don't forget to subscribe. Do you need to make a colour chart? Even if you feel like you can never get your head around colour mixing, you can at least try out colours before you place them on your paper, and you can at least try to work within a limited amount of colours. As I said, that's a subject for another video. All I'm saying here is don't grab every colour in your palette, particularly if you're working with a large set of block paints, pan paints. Don't be grabbing every single colour, randomly chucking on your paper without much thought, without stopping to consider how these colours will look together. And at the very least, swatch a new colour on a piece of paper. Allow it to dry for 5 minutes before you check if it actually works in your painting. And the great thing about having a paper swatch is you can literally hold it next to the area you were going to place it and see if it's the correct colour. You may just need a little bit of adjustment to be darker or lighter. And trying your colours out before you chuck them on, just like techniques, is going to save you so much time in the long run, because you may want to paint quickly, but there's nothing more soul destroying than a ruined painting, and that's a whole lot of wasted time. Now, the next one is all about not letting your work dry. Now, whatever medium you work within, there's a need to let things dry at some stage before you carry on. This possibly doesn't apply to pencil work, of course, and dry media, but it does apply to pretty much everything else, from mosaics to printmaking to watercolors and acrylics. There are times when you are going to need to let areas dry. Now, if you're working on something like a botanical painting, and maybe you're painting, 20 identical little pink flowers, you may not need to do this because you can work on one and then you can move over to another and then go back to the first. But generally speaking, particularly with landscapes, there's going to be a time when you just need to let things dry. And so many beginners ruin work because they're getting all of these back runs and drying lines, and a lot of it's caused because you just don't take time to let things dry. Now, when you're watching tutorials like mine or anybody else's on the internet, it can be very, very deceptive because we say, well, let this area dry, and then, there's just a video cut, isn't there? And we're straight on to the next bit. But in reality, we may have let things dry for an hour. We may have gone out for the evening. It may even be, and has been sometimes here on YouTube, a week before I get back to that painting. But of course, when you're watching me paint, it's just a second, isn't it? And I say, well, let this bit dry. And you think, oh, okay, Michelle's letting that bit dry, 5 minutes, that'll do it. Often not. Again, this is hugely dependent on weather conditions and room temperature. But trust me, in almost every painting, particularly big things like landscapes, there is going to be a time when you need to step away from it and let it dry for a significant amount of time. I suggest that rather than sort of hovering over it and waiting for it to dry and, resorting to hair dryers and things, which I do feel sometimes can dull the pigments a little bit, I suggest that you just sort of put it down and go and do something else. That way you're not tempted to go back to it sooner than it's ready. So don't forget to take regular breaks to just completely let things dry. In my last video, which spoke about the 5 biggest breakthroughs that I had with watercolor painting, and I'll link that one in the description of this one if you haven't seen it yet, I spoke about the ugly phase in your painting. And there's an ugly phase in every medium, but it's particularly noticeable in watercolors where we're working light to dark and we haven't got those strong darks in yet. It's all a bit mid-tones, it's all a bit wishy-washy halfway through. We may be working up in layers of broad colour and we hit the ugly phase. There's a tendency after you hit this almost to sort of a switch is thrown in your brain. You convince yourself it's not going to turn out any good, so it really doesn't matter. I may as well just either give up or rush to the end. And this is the stage where we start being demotivated, and we start taking less care over our work. I don't want you to do that. The ugly stage is a natural stage that you get through. You've got the beginning when you've got all that optimism of white paper or clean canvas, and then you've got the end when you have a finished piece, and halfway through you've just got a load of murky mud and layers. It is very easy at that point to sort of let that switch be thrown in your brain and just to let yourself think, it doesn't matter anymore, I'll just rush through it now. I want you to really slow down. When you hit that phase, tell yourself that you've no idea really how it's going to look in the end. It could actually still have a lot of potential, so I want you to take just as much care when you reach that halfway phase as you were taking right at the beginning, and this gives you the best chance of success. So let's talk about painting too fast because you literally have some kind of time constraint. And I'm thinking particularly about being in an art class. And I myself taught for years. I taught hour-and-a-half long classes. I taught day courses. Most commonly, I would teach a 2-hour class or even a 2.5-hour class. But of course, everybody paints at different rates. And I know that if you've been in an art class and perhaps everybody's painting birds, there's that moment, isn't there, where you look across at the person opposite you and you see that they've painted a bird and a branch and a sky and some leaves, and you've literally got a leg and a bit of a beak. It's very disheartening. You immediately start to think to yourself, I should be painting faster. But in reality, there's no actual amount of time that somebody should take or shouldn't take to complete a piece of art. If you need to take longer, that's fine. However, there is actually, I think there's a justification for painting a little bit faster when you're in a class, because if you don't, you are sort of missing out. If you never get to the bit where you're putting any kind of sky in, then you miss out from having your tutor be able to help you with skies. So I think you have to look almost at time constraints like this, at classes, as just an opportunity just to be sometimes a little bit looser than you would be normally, and just to get the most out of the class and look at the class as a learning experience rather than a time when you might produce, a completely finished piece of work. But then the opposite is also true. If you have got, 3/4 of the way through a class, and a friend of mine did this for years, she came to my classes, it was so frustrating for me. She was such a brilliant artist. And always when we got near the end, she'd sort of say, well, I never paint at home. I won't have time to finish this. So I'll just chuck some stuff on it and you finish it quickly. And she would completely ruin her work. So if that is the case, if you're getting near the end of a class and you know that just 1 or 2 little touches that you should take time over would give you a really beautiful finished painting, then don't feel that you have to finish within the class. But also do understand that a class can be a bit of a different atmosphere. Your tutor might be getting you to paint in a different way. I paint in a fairly neat botanical way, but I went to a class once with a very famous artist here in the UK, and it was acrylics, and he got us painting the whole thing with a 2-inch flat brush, no water, no mixing, no underdrawing. We just went for it. I got some really interesting results, and I didn't allow myself to be stressed by the fact that I was painting a bit faster, but neither would I have been unhappy if I'd ended up with a bad result. So in the case of classes, I think it is okay to work a little bit faster than you might otherwise do. Try to relax and enjoy the process and not be so worried about the finished outcome, because that really isn't the point of a class. The point of a class is to learn. If you do need to spend that whole class drawing 1 leg and 1 beak, it really doesn't matter if the person opposite you, and you're allowed to hate them just a little bit, has got a finished beautiful painting at the end. Another occasion when you may need to slow down and just stop painting for a little while is when your eyes start to get tired. Now, I am short-sighted. I also have varifocals now. And if you're like me and you're short-sighted, you'll know that sometimes you end up just taking your glasses off and sort of bending your head down and peering at your work from about here. There's actually a big advantage to being very short-sighted, and that's that you can actually see close up much more clearly than other people can. But it is also very straining on the eyes. You may also be continuing to work after it's got dark and the light just isn't good anymore. Unless you're on some kind of physical deadline, like I used to be years ago to get work ready for an exhibition, there's no need to continue working if the light is bad. One of the first classes I ever taught was in a cafe on an evening. And in the winter in the UK, it can get dark. I mean, sometimes it feels like it's getting dark at 2 p.m, but it can certainly be dark, completely dark by 4 p.m. And people would come in from my drawing and my painting class. You couldn't see colours properly. There were spotlights on the ceiling. They were casting, 25 different shadows on one still life object. It was really, really difficult. You need to take regular breaks to let your eyes recover. Even if it's only 5 minutes, I do suggest that what you should do, and my optician told me this, is that you should get away from the work that you're looking at up close and actually go over to a window and stare out into the distance. This just allows your eyes to relax again. Don't keep working if you've been working for ages, if your eyes are tired, because not only are you straining your eyes, you're actually making it more difficult to get a good result because you can't see tones as well. You certainly can't see colours as well. Of course, there are things like daylight bulbs that you can get. At the end of the day, nothing's better than natural light, and you should take regular breaks in order that your eyes don't become too tired, leading to poor work and possibly headaches. Somebody very recently on the comments here on YouTube asked me how I can tell, or rather how they can tell when their work is finished. This is a big problem for some of us, isn't it? We sort of get near the end and think, well, I could see that, I could do a little bit more to it, but I don't know if it needs it. Will I be overworking it? Maybe we're even halfway through and we're not quite sure what it needs next. Or maybe we feel there's something wrong with our work and we just can't see what it is. This is when you need to take a break from your work, and I mean a long break, at least 2 or 3 hours, sometimes overnight. There's very much a mindset with beginners of sort of diving into a painting and working until it's finished. But actually, this is not the best way to get a successful result. Any professional artist will actually step back and spend some time away from their work, because when you approach your work with new eyes, it's like you're seeing it afresh. I was once doing a drawing and it was going to be a painting. It had all of these little cottages in the distance, and I knew that something somewhere was wrong with the perspective. Something just wasn't right. There were multiple points of perspective, so it wasn't as easy as just working it out mathematically. I needed to judge it on a more instinctive level, but I just couldn't see what was wrong with it. So I put that piece of work aside. I went out for a few hours. I came back in, and as I walked up to my piece of work, I could instantly see the house and the very line that was wrong. When you are staring constantly at your work, you're up close to it and you're sort of in the weeds, you lose the ability to look at it. Imagine if you were planting a garden, you were planting sort of flower after flower after flower. Sooner or later, you're going to want to step back and just see how everything looks. And this is what you need to do with your work. If you don't know if a piece is finished, put it aside and look at it the next day. I assure you it will become much more clear to you. And if there are just 1 or 2 little touches, something needs strengthening, something needs darkening, you'll see it straight away. You simply cannot see that stuff when you've been staring at it for 6 hours from a distance of 12 inches away. You do need to take regular breaks from your work, not only for your own peace of mind, but just to see what it needs next. And if you do find you're in that situation of not knowing when to stop painting and not knowing when something's finished, I assure you, if you try this method, if you just leave it alone and look at it the next day, it's all going to become so much more clear. There are so many advantages to just not looking at your work for a few hours and looking at it with fresh eyes. You really will see things that were right in front of your nose and you simply couldn't see them. And all of this good stuff happens just by taking a break. So do let me know in the comments if any of these ideas resonated with you, if there are any times when you feel that you did work too fast, or any times when you felt that you benefited from just slowing down and taking your time with things. This is such an important concept. I'm sure I haven't covered everything in this video, so if you have any other ideas for reasons why you should slow down a little bit, do put them in the comments. And before you leave this video, don't forget to check out the video description. I've got lots of free downloadables there for you. There's even a free watercolor painting course. You can also find out all about all my paid courses. I have some fantastic courses for beginners in watercolor. I've got a complete drawing course. I also have a watercolor pencils course. So do check those out if you're looking for something a little bit more structured. As we've discussed in this video, you never get a good painting out of a bad drawing. The good news is that anyone can learn to draw. I've got some really good videos that are going to give you so much confidence because they're just all about little changes that you can make, because it's not about being able to draw or not being able to draw. It's about constant improvement. You can watch one of those videos right now.